Madelina, are you around? Madelina Mkiwema, the moderator for this panel discussion. If you're around, kindly join in at the dais. All right. If we can have Miss Esther Angawa at the dais. Mr. David at the dais. We can all listen in to this amazing panel discussion. Let me sanitize this for you. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit. Just sit. I think the Chief of Party's speech or address is ready. We can listen in. We missed out on this. And then now we can move into the panel discussions. All right.
Our keynote speaker, Honorable Joe Mosheru, Cabinet Secretary for ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs.
So we'll have the remarks by Mr. Akim Chiaji, the Chief of Party, Yali Regional Leadership Center, East Africa. Something more amazing about the regional center.
The Cabinet Secretary. For ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs, the Charge the Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Eric Midler, Director General, Kenya School of Government, Professor Ludeki Chwea, Ayali alumni and all young people connected from different corners of our continent and beyond, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm incredibly humbled and delighted to be part of this historic summit. May I begin by extending a note of appreciation to the Yali Alumni Chapter of Kenya for following in the tradition to convene the third Youth Leadership Transformation Summit despite the challenges posed by COVID. It means a whole lot to me and to the organization I represent, the Yali Regional Leadership Center East Africa, for me to be part of such an ingenious concept. We are indeed proud of your consistent achievement. The Young African Leaders Initiative was established by the US President Barack Obama with the aim of creating the next generation of African leaders. I must begin by thanking USAID and the partners it convened to make this dream a reality. Special gratitude goes to Mastercard Foundation, Dow Chemical, the Citi Group, Deloitte, Kenyatta University, among a host of corporate institutions and dedicated people who made this program possible. We are indeed grateful for your decision to invest in the noble cause which is proudly changing the African narrative. And why do we focus on young people? We at Yali believe that the youth have contemporary knowledge of the world better than any adult. That a futuristic society must therefore take its youth seriously because their ideas are more relevant to the future. I dare say that in Kenya and in Africa, the future is not only young, but significantly female, and hence, governments must work round the clock to harness this demographic and gender dividend. We recognize that governments have a crucial role to play in creating an enabling environment for young people to make their contribution to governance. Ladies and gentlemen, let me offer a brief background of YALI and why we find this conference theme particularly relevant and timely. Anchored on the vision of Barack Obama and significantly supported by the US government, our center has continued to train, mentor, and offer practical platform for young people across the continent to not only connect and scale up their common vision for a peaceful, thriving, and a prosperous continent. Our center has graduated over 4,000 young leaders who continue to lead transformative initiatives in business, public sector, and in the civil society. Indeed, this summit is an example of the bold initiative that our alumni are implementing across the 14 countries where our program is currently present. As was mentioned, this summit has received significant funding from the Yearly Transformation Fund under the category on innovations in working with government. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we work in the business space or in the civil society, it is not possible to realize the dream of a thriving and functional society without an effective, efficient, and responsive government that puts people's interest at the core. This summit, ladies and gentlemen, is an opportunity for us and for young people in this country and beyond to dialogue with government on the progress made, the constraints to be overcome, and the opportunities available for scaling up youth contribution to making governments work. It is a known fact that the government of Kenya and several governments in these regions are indeed making unprecedented investments to address youth constraints and to facilitate their participation in governance. However, several gaps remain, and the youth in this country must be at the forefront of solution finding. I wish to propose certain parameters to be considered as we find and seek solutions to the challenges to youth participation in governance. First, our solutions must be technology savvy, leveraging the power of technology and the media for effective engagement, advocacy, and influencing. Seeing that in this country, the internet penetration is one of the highest in Africa. Our solutions must also be youth aware, defining what we can do to create and deepen safe and empowering spaces for young people, enabling them to organize and to engage government. Our solutions must also be youth-centered, because empowerment starts with what the youth want. We must in particular jettison the idea that the youth don't know what is good for them. Our solution must be inclusive. They must foster the participation of young people in all spheres and at all levels of governance. Finally, we must ensure that initiatives to bring youth to the fore must be focused on building a critical mass of young leaders capable of spearheading, harnessing, and mobilizing young people towards common causes that are useful to the development of their countries. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference is a testimony to the possibilities within us, within the youth in this country and in this continent. Together, as civil society, as private sector, and as government, we can indeed achieve more. And with the challenges posed, allow me to quote the words of Margaret Mead, the world-renowned anthropologist who wrote that. And I quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And never believe that a few caring people can't change the world, for indeed, that's all who ever have." Ladies and gentlemen, together, let's make Kenya and Africa great. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, together, let's make Kenya and Africa great. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, together, let's make...
Round of applause. A big round of applause. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to introduce... can we disconnect the audio up? All right, brilliant. Now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our panelists today. There's no better way of doing this than celebrating young people who are making change within their very own spaces. From the farthest end, allow me introduce and appreciate being here, Ms. Mboki Mburu, the convener, Youth Serving Organization Consortium. Round of applause. And we can all wave to her. Just in the middle is Mr. David Twitoek, the Enroll's Youth Program Director. Please, round of applause to Mr. David. He's also a Yale alumni. And finally, right next to me is Ms. Esther Angawa, who is the LSK Council member and Yale alumni. Please, round of applause. Now, I will give this chance to our panelists. Our discussion today is reimagining meaningful youth engagement in law, policy and governance processes. And I'm so happy, part of our panelists are, some of the faces that we've seen in our, in TV. We see them every single day. This is their areas of expertise. And we want to learn more and understand better. Please, Ms. Esther, would you introduce yourself again and maybe mention to us something that struck you and makes you stand out as a young person, a leader, of course, who's making change in a community?
Thank you, Fred. Can you hear me? Good. It's 1 minute to noon from my watch. Good morning. My name is Esther Angawa. I come from the beautiful county of Migori, a constituency called Nyatike. I don't know if you've heard of it. We have lots of gold there, lots of copper, lots of fish, and lots of sugarcane. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Fred, it's a bit difficult to say what makes me stand out because I'm not on that side looking at me. I think that would be better assessed by other people. but I currently serve in the Council of the Law Society of Kenya as a council member. I am also an aide to the President of the Law Society of Kenya, Nelson Havi. I do a lot of work now, particularly, and I think that's probably what Fred was referring to, in constitutional litigation and trying to add our voice through the courts and the litigation process to the constitutional review processes going on in the country. Other than that, I'm just a regular lawyer doing regular legal work, but a young person who desires a change in our country, a young person who desires to see more engagement by the youth. I had one of us introduce themselves as having been a member of cohort 39. I was in cohort 16. So which cohort is currently now on?
32, and now we have the Africa one. 32 was the last one.
Okay, so I mean to imagine that since the year that I left Yali, which is not too long ago, we've had 42 minus 16, 26 more cohorts of young people getting trained on how to be great leaders and transform our country and our continent. I think that's an excellent achievement, and we are grateful to Yali and to the Regional Learning Center for that. Fred, I think that's enough for now. Asante.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Do we have young people in the room? Good morning. I want to feel the energy of young people. Good morning. Awesome. My name is Mbuki Mburu. I'm the convener of the Youth Serving Organization Consortium. I think I'll just focus on that because I think I have done so many things. I've co-founded so many youth initiatives and of course the consortium that brings together all the youth serving organizations in Kenya. And mine is to say that I'm excited to be part of this because I have been championing meaningful youth engagement, and it's actually a constitutional right for you to be meaningfully engaged. Public participation is not just public participation. You need to engage in every process. So for me, I'm happy that we're in this panel, this discussion today. And also just to say, probably if maybe a bit of work that I've done, I don't know whether you heard about the litigation that we put in court over the National Employment Authority. Myself and a lady called Nerima Wako, a very good friend of mine, we were just discussing, we're like, it's getting irritating, how we put in place people who are not qualified, and we have so many young people who are qualified for the same job. And I remember we just discussed, over WhatsApp, and we're like, okay, what do we need to do? Who do we need to reach out to? And, the idea grew, and we're like, okay, we need to look at what CJ Mutunga put in place, a mechanism in which we can have public interest litigation. And we used the framework to actually file that case. I think we filed in October because I remember over Mashujaa Day, we were discussing over how we'll be able to finalize and file in court. And from that engagement, we filed in October, and by January the following year, we were able, actually January this 2021, or is it 2020? I'm a bit confused, but yeah. We got the ruling in 4 months. So it's really to say that, yes, it's a constitutional right, there's frameworks, and we can always engage. I'm looking forward to a very good engagement. Thank you.
Engagement. Now I want to start with Esther still. Do you think young people are engaged in law, in policy, and in governance processes? And please, when you will be responding to this, do you think there's a strong evidence even to support if yes, young people are truly engaged in these processes? And maybe finally, because that is the same response that we'll get from other participants or panelists, how far do we have to go to really understand and truly say young people are truly engaged in youth engagement? Rather, young people are now engaged in law, policy, and governance processes.
Thank you, Fred. Do I think young people are engaged? Yes, young people are engaged. Whether young people are engaged meaningfully and to the largest extent possible is a different thing. Whether young people are engaged out of their own efforts, like my sisters, or whether young people are engaged in a structured format that is supported not just by NGOs or civil society or private individuals, but also supported by government and its agencies, that's a different thing. So my answer to that is yes, young people are engaged. Meaningfully, not quite. We have a few wins, like those of the litigation by her. We've seen many other strategic litigations involving the rights of the young people and their engagement in government policy and how they are treated in terms of appointments, etc. We have seen that happen, but it has often happened out of individual efforts and not an organized, formalized effort by government. We have seen instances, not just in the case of the NEMA, but the National Employment Authority. We've seen that across the board, where appointments are of people who've been politicians since before I was born, before he was born, and yet we've got all these young people, those of you here and those of you who are joining us online from all over the world, available with the skills to do the work that needs to be done. So we need young people involved. We need to understand, one, where young people can come in terms of their engagement in legislation, their engagement in law, coming up with legislation and regulations that advance not just their interests, but the interests of the Kenyan people in general, and policies, basically general principles by which a government is run, or by which it carries out its management of public affairs. And we've got ensuring that young people are also involved in governance, and governance is, in the simplest way, defined as the application of these legislation and policies to various aspects through government institutions and other partners. Now, if we do not involve the young people in lawmaking, for a start, if we do not involve them in development of policy, if we do not involve them in the application of those laws and policies, that is governance, then we do end up with a situation where we are sitting, or the other government officers are sitting in a boardroom in a hotel somewhere, imagining what the problems of the young people in the Lake Bogoria region are, creating regulations or policies that they think solve that problem which they have created in that hotel, probably in the Rift Valley somewhere, and assuming that passing that legislation or implementing those policies will benefit the people in Bogoria. It cannot work like that. It must start from that place. Talk to those people. Get to know what their issues are. What would they like to see in those policies? If it is young people, and I'm glad to meet Agatha, she's an engineer. She spoke to me when we were having tea, and she said, well, many professionals who are not lawyers support what you people do, but we do not have the space to say that we support those things. No one's listening. No one's listening to the engineers, no one's listening to the teachers, no one's listening to the welders, no one's listening to the boda riders, because we are all stuck in big hotels creating problems that do not exist without talking to the people who we want to create solutions for, and going through the entire process of policy making and legislative drafting, and then giving them, we were discussing this, 7 days or 14 days to send a memorandum to Parliament, or to send a memorandum to whichever institution it is that is coming up with that policy or legislation. We must change that perspective. We must begin from the people themselves and to know what their real issues are. How do we build policies? How do we draw legislation that answer to the needs of the people? And the youth are a big part of that. The youth, those of us here, those of us elsewhere, in our different spheres, wherever it is that we are working, we have that opportunity and that voice to say that this is what we want in that space. It doesn't have to be in Nairobi. It doesn't have to be at Bunge. It can be in your ward administrator's office, from your ward. It can be in your member of parliament's constituency office, in your constituency, like Nyatike for mine. It can be at the county assembly in your various counties. And that takes me to the solutions, as Fred asked, what can be done? And the first thing is we must change our attitude in this country towards giving information when it is sought. We have Article 33 of the Constitution that gives everybody the right to seek from a state officer or state agency information on any matter. Getting that information after you have sought it is a different thing. We have the Commission on the Administration of Justice that seeks. You can go to where you write to an institution and they do not respond. You can petition the commission and ask. There's a process to it. But why do we even need to get to that point? If, for instance, my county, Migori, is undertaking a budget process, and the Constitution and the law requires that they have public participation, they'll probably set out a schedule that we will be in this town hall on this day, but there'll be no copies of that budget which they want discussed on that day given to the people. Now, it beats the logic of having an event to discuss the budget if that budget is not available, that information is not available to the people that you're budgeting for, because government does not budget for itself, it budgets for the people that it's supposed to serve, whether through services or provision of goods or, education, whatever it is. So we have to seek and push to have a more open policy and more open attitude from government, and I'm hoping that those of us here who are from the government side of things will understand that it benefits government for us to know how to help government do what it wants to do. And we cannot help government do that if we do not have the information about what you want to do for us, what your plans are, and how we can support or what we can build on. Secondly, we must train, and I think this is perhaps something that we could consider doing at Yali, Fred, now that your team has just come into office and you've got all the energy still before you get tired. We need to take serious concern with empowering not just young people, but everyone in every sphere with the tools to monitor implementation of policy, to monitor implementation of legislation, to monitor governance, right? Because we can send our views by email, as they always ask, within the 7 or 14 days that they give. But if we do not follow up and see, we passed, for instance, the CAS, Honorable Nadia was talking about the Ajira program. She was talking about the Youth Enterprise Fund. These have been there. Do we have mechanisms for monitoring what impact, if any, those programs are having on the youth in the various places? I was hoping she would still be around with us, but she's not. But because she requested that a report be given to her on the deliberations, I'm hoping this can be noted and part of what is submitted to her ministry. They say the Ajira program, for instance, is in every county. I haven't seen it in my county. Maybe I'm not as involved, but I would have had something because I'm very involved with my county and the young people. So at the top of the tier of the pyramid, sitting in Nairobi, a government officer may actually be of the impression that these projects are being implemented in the various counties where they ought to be implemented. But if there isn't any specific monitoring or assessment tool within certain periods that anyone can say in Nyatike, in Ntimaru, wherever it is, we have managed to get this number of youth funding through the Youth Enterprise Fund. We have managed to get this number of disabled people access to employment through the Ajira program. We have been able to recruit this number of young men and women into the National Youth Service. So if we do not have that, then we can never tell what these policies that have continuously been established and that have constantly been unveiled. They're always being unveiled every other day, whether it is they're actually having impact on the ground. And I think lastly, just in summary, let me say that we must, as a country, and I'm hoping we can send some of this to Bunge. I know my friend Charles is here from the Senate. Public participation has to be meaningful. And we cannot have a situation where we have in Parliament a public participation bill that has been pending for over a year, and we say we are doing meaningful public participation. Public participation cannot just be a matter of notices, picking memorandum from groups and young men and women, and slotting dates in a social hall without giving information, without caring what language is being used during those sessions, without ensuring that everybody's voice, or at least a large portion of those who are going to be affected, are heard. So it is my plea, Charles, and I hope you will send this to your colleagues. Let us press to have the Public Participation Act bill enacted into law, so that we are all aware what public participation entails, and we are able to hold the different institutions accountable. And instead of having situations where we are always going to court to reverse policies, to reverse legislation, to reverse processes that were said to have gone through public participation, but which, after scrutiny of the court, are found to have been wanting. So I think that's something that we need to do, because we are also wasting a lot of taxpayers' money doing all those things only for the courts to say, well, you say you did, but you fell short. And by that time, all those resources have gone to waste. So it's something that we must do. And lastly, I'll speak about involvement of youth and young people in politics. Please run again. I hope you intend to. We will support in any way we can. We must have, and these are a plea to the government, we must have put in place policies that require, one, a dedicated amount of the monies that are paid into political parties go to supporting youthful aspirants, because we will have young men like him, young women like Agatha, who want to run for office but do not have the financial muscle to do that. However, political parties are funded by taxpayers' money and may use the funds as they deem fit and later account to the Auditor General. But if we have specific requirements that this percentage of the fund that is received by political parties ought to go to the support of aspirants who are youthful to run for office, that will be a great achievement. And a young, I think it was you, who asked about social media and the bullying and how we can use that space as young people to speak up and to seek elective office, which I encourage all of us here to do. We have the National Broadcasting Service, KBC. We have private media houses. We have policies already that govern how media is supposed to run. It would be of great advantage if the government and policymakers could require that all this, because young people cannot afford to buy airtime on Citizen or Nation or KTN. You cannot afford to put up an ad of your candidature on TV or on radio across the country. But if by policy we require both the national broadcaster and private broadcasters to give airtime to young people and youth-centered programs, youth-centered discourse, youth-centered discussion, that is meaningful. Because, of course, we all watch TV and we will see the same faces every morning in the breakfast shows, in the lunchtime shows, in the nighttime shows. Yet, we have so many young people who could be given that platform to speak to the Kenyan public. And if we have policy that requires mainstream media to include youth and meaningful youthful programs in their broadcasting, I think that would be great. I can stop there for now.
Now I'm clear. From experience, active participation in politics or in governance or in policy reform cannot be meaningful if a population of 75% in Kenya is only represented by one person in the National Assembly, one person in each county assembly, and possibly one person in the Senate. That is complete underrepresentation. Secondly, there are many, many good policies in place in forms of acts, enacted by the parliament. But as we speak, those policies were developed trying to address a perceived, may I call it a perceived problem, that youth are not willing to take part in politics, that youths are lazy, all they know is about entertainment. If I can go to a perfect example, Election Act. For those who have familiarized themselves with that act, it's very nice if you read as a youth. You can even be tempted to go and vie right now. But my brother and sister, it's not a joke. They are complete skimming out of young people. From number one, electioneering process is very expensive.
expensive even from the policy itself. For you to register and be regarded as a candidate, from now aspirant, that's how it begins. You declare your interest, you're classified as an aspirant. From the aspirant, you go through, familiarize yourself with the electorates, that is Mwananchi. You go through a political party, you are nominated. From a nomination, then you can face the IBC to verify whether you meet the threshold. In this threshold, there's a fee that comes along. Okay, I forgot. When you go to chapter 6 of our Kenyan Constitution, a very nice policy also. And the essence was to make sure we have leaders of integrity. Now, the documents required for you to be considered as a legitimate candidate, the minimum we use to acquire those documents is at least 50,000. By default, to a young person, that is not a joke. That is not enough. You go to a political party, for you to consider you now, your name will be here, and you'll face the electorate for the election, there is a fee required to do so. So at the end of the day, again, with good policies, technically, young person is kicked out. Why? We are the men, gentlemen and gentle ladies. If you are not involved actively on deciding, in debating, in coming up with the proposals, all you are required as a young person is just to append your signature that this is about you. So, and this is what we have agreed, even as minorities. If we are discussing anything related to minority, if we are not on the table, we know by default we are the menu. You and my fellow youth in this country, if by any chance somebody is developing a program to address our issues, and no one is actively involved, no one understands our gains and our pains, then it's not for us. It's against us, because we are the menu. Now, to the issue of what we call qualification, and this cut across not only on governance, but also in public offices, in some of the employment sectors and so forth. You have gone through a difficult experience to acquire your skills in form of knowledge, your degree. And the moment you just show your papers and say, yes, I'm capable, all they will ask you is, what is your 5 years experience? Oh, okay, so I go, where do I now go and look for the 5 years of experience? So technically, stay wherever I shall be until you get 5 years experience for me to give you this certain job. What does that mean again to any common Kenyan or common youth? The jobs that are there, which we know very well, they are very few, no problem, but they're not for us. So if they cannot think about the cost of handling unemployment youth versus the cost of training that young person who has now come into the job market, train him or her to gain the required skills and even the experience that the job demands, then why are we saying again that we are actively involved or there is a meaningful engagement? So that is my clear concern. Now, a perfect example, we have what we call National Youth Service. And I have a lot of respect for that kind of service, because many of our youths have been engaged and they are making a meaningful transformation to our country. But that is not enough. Why
are we not having the National Youth Council, where young people have a structure from the national to the county, where they discuss and debate policies that affects them? They are the ones that develop those critical memorandums and share to the relevant agencies or platforms, and now we can have a joint discussion. You are only involved when the document is to the final stage. You appear for them to see that, oh, okay, you are there. But you're just there to rubber stamp and validate. I'm even lacking a better term. I think for what the formality aspect is our main role as young people. And I think that's not where we belong. So what should be the way forward? So number one, as we do these policy reforms, and I'm glad one of us at least is venturing in legal field, IBC should stand very firm and say this: no political party should ever receive any funding unless 30% of their structure have youth. And that is one of my strongest concerns. And that is one of the things, the pain that I experienced when I was engaging in politics. Secondly, nomination slots, which is, it was proposed initially to heal this underrepresentation aspect. But again, it is not serving the purpose. People who were supposed to gain representation are youth, minorities, marginalized communities, people living with disability. But when you check, I did a statistics and a research. Out of 47 counties, and I want you to get this very clearly, only 16 counties in the county assembly have a PWD. Only 10 counties out of 47 have a representation of a minority. And only 23 of them have a representative, youth representative. So you now wonder, and when we go to the National Assembly, again, that's what I mentioned, 111, what is not enough? So what does this mean, great gentlemen and ladies? Whatever Wali is doing is so wonderful, but we have to take it and own it and build a proper structure, implement these skills we have learned, synergize our moves together. And I know at the end of the day we shall realize what we call a meaningful engagement of youth in governance, law, and policy making.
Round of applause. Listening from Mr. Bokemburu. Buki, do you think young people are truly engaged? And as a convener, you serving organizations for consortium, how practically and with some proper evidence do you provide to, share the idea around these young people involved in, policy and all these other processes where we need their representation? And if that is not the case, then probably how far should we then have this conversation, and how do we have proper mitigations towards this thing?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. And I'm liking the conversation from my co-panelists because they are giving, a true reflection. She talked heavily about policy, and himself again about representation and politics. And for me, I think I'll point to where I engage young people every day, and I will also reiterate that young people are still not engaged, leave alone meaningfully. And you know, when they were speaking, I was thinking about, you know, what are those conversations we have as young people as well? I mean, I hear every day people saying, earth is hard, you know, and then maisha ni kujituma. And you know, that's what also reflects even in our own structures, in our own institutions, where she talked about access to information. I mean, it's a right. I think Article 23 you talked about, and actually access to information is one of the biggest challenge. And giving an example of why particularly we started the Youth Serving Organization Consortium is because we realized every youth organization, I mean, today how many youth organizations are there? There's so many, and everyone is trying to do their own interventions. But then we were like, perfect, you're doing those interventions because they are needed. But then how do we come up in a way that our engagement is structured, it's harmonized in a way that when we actually put something on board, everyone gets to listen. And we started off, and I like the fact that he talked about the National Youth Council. At that time, the National Youth Council was undergoing amendment bill. An amendment bill was put in place by Honorable, Gideon Koter, who is the youth member of representing young people. And by the way, sorry to divert, but if you look at Parliament, for example, and Senate, 7.7% of members of Parliament are young members of Parliament, below 35. And he actually said that, you know, the population is 75% of this country. So if you match 7.7% of representation of young members of Parliament to 75%, we are not talking about representation here. We are still underrepresented. Going back to my conversation, at the time, we were engaging the National Youth Council amendment bill. And at that time, it was very interesting. So, you know, we convene, meeting, there's a lot of engagement, by the way. Memorandum, it's not easy. And, you know, she talked again about memorandum. And saying, as much as there are ways to engage these institutions, I mean, the procedures are also quite heavy. And we're like, okay, we will follow the procedures, you know, convening young people, getting their views, and, you know, it's the aspect of, can we have people-driven policies? And imagine, you know, in engaging the National Youth Council amendment at that time, we didn't know that actually there are two bills. So there was a bill done by the Ministry of Public Service at that time, and then there's another bill being done by Honorable Gideon Koter. So there's a lot of engagements, you know, partnership engagement and all. And really, I'm trying to show this, that even institutions, the structures of engagements are also very hard. Sometimes you don't even get to know the right information. And, you know, we engage in that space, and then you realize, wow, there's a whole engagement that, you know, you don't have access to. So as the youth serving organizations at that time, we engaged in the bill, but unfortunately we engaged in the wrong bill. In the wrong bill, why? Because the Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender at that time was the one calling the partners. And of course, it's a government body and all that, and you're like, okay, maybe this is the right bill. But what we didn't know, that there's a private sector bill, and, you know, and of course the one that goes to Parliament through the executive. And unfortunately, as much as we engaged in the bill by the executive, it's not the bill that was before Parliament. And just to show how much effort these young people engaged in, and yet they were not engaging in the right bill. And then we had to retract and, you know, all that. So what I'm trying to show is that the structures of engagements are still a challenge. There are a lot of institutional gaps. There's a challenge around information in terms of how young people are engaged. And also when you look at policies, there's a time the National Youth Council, for example, was housed at the Ministry of Public Service. And now it's now at the Ministry of ICT. And as a person, as a young person who wants to engage the government and all these structures, you realize the National Youth Council, the youth representative body of the State Department of Youth, was moved to the Ministry of ICT. That is, you know, one of the departments. But if you look at the structure of government, youth policies are still under Ministry of Public Service. So you find find, even when you want to engage on youth issues, you're like, is it a policy issue? I need to go to the ministry. If it's a functional issue, I go to the State Department of ICT. And you see, there's serious institutional gaps, such that if I want to engage with government, if I don't have that back information, how am I going to engage? And it's crazy. But for me, even as we have those challenges, I think for me is to say that one of the things that we need to do as young people, giving solutions now, is we need continuously engage and collaborate. Because sometimes I might have information and you have an information that I don't have. And really is to say that we must continuously engage to be able to have concrete impact. But also is to say that as much as we have all these platforms that we must engage, is to say that even these organizations, like for example the National Youth Council, I remember there was a time, there's a whole conversation about Biashara Fund, and at that time, they just say, submit your memorandum by this time. And of course, you submit, you don't get a chance. Submitting a memorandum is okay, but sometimes things are best said, virtually and, elaborating and all that. But there are no platforms to be able to engage that. And I remember we actually approached the National Youth Council, being a government body. They got a chance to submit to the committee. And from that engagement also, we were able to restructure or to influence how Biashara Fund is supposed to be done. And really is to say that one of the things that as a youth serving organization consortium that we've had is we've been engaging with WIACT. It's a youth department within AMREF. And they were running a program about meaningful youth engagement. And Charles Munywa, I don't know whether he's in the room, he really helped us because he understands how, for example, Parliament and the Senate runs. And he sort of guides us through in terms of how do we engage Parliament. Because sometimes you see the adverts in the newspaper. How many young people read the newspaper every day? Not so many. Most of this information we get from social media. And for us, he was able to guide us in terms of how, as young people, do we need to penetrate into the Parliament. And I remember one of the things that he advised us is to write a letter to the Speaker, the Clerk of the National Assembly and the Senate, to be able to be involved in a stakeholder engagement. So that is something that you can also explore as young people. How do you use the systems for us to be able to engage in policy? And currently, we are actually pursuing having a youth desk at the Senate, where any kind of engagement, young people really need to be engaged. But also is to say that even the Parliament itself and the National Assembly, have 7.7 representation. But then, of course, you can't influence who people choose or who people, elect. But as young people, we can actually choose. But unfortunately, sometimes, there's that limitation. But we were actually pushing to have a situation where even these committees, because that's where everything happens in terms of Parliament, can we have young people maybe sitting in those committees to just, understand how the committees run? And by the way, my colleague here, when you get to Parliament today, you don't know standing orders, how they run, committees and everything. Like young people who get into Parliament, they take 1 year to actually get to understand the system. And that is a real problem. We cannot have, very few young people in Parliament, and they take 1 year, 2 years to try and figure out the system so that they can meaningfully engage by themselves. So even as much as you're saying we have 7.7%, even those 7.7%, even when they engage, it's very hard for them to have meaningful. But for me, solutions is to say that we need to operationalize the Information Act. I think that's a critical thing. And then also, she talked about monitoring tools for these policies. Because we have, for example, youth employment or youth unemployment is one of the biggest issues in this country. And you know what? We have over 22 policies in this country focusing on youth employment. So if we have tools to monitor these policies, we'll be able to have results. Thank you.
Brilliant. Round of applause. I will now open this to the rest of you. We can now share our questions with them, and we can make it as short as possible so that we can move to the next session. Olunga, if you're able to pick one microphone from the farthest end. You can just raise your hand, and please let's have a very meaningful and make it brief, your questions. So reimagining meaningful youth engagement in law, policy and governance processes. Our panelists have really given us some proper and a more, concrete discussions around this. So that we can have some meaningful impact over this. And say yes, it was meaningful, it was impactful, and it was well. All right. Can you give microphone to the gentleman first row? Yeah, first row. First row. Right in front of you. All right. All right. You can introduce yourself. You're alumni also as well, and I'll ask you a question. And you can also direct it to whoever you want to ask that question.
My name is Douglas Maraga. I'm Yale alumni, cohort 29. I'm the former youngest aspiring senator, Nyamira County. And I successfully failed. My very pregnant question is, right now, currently, we are having a debate whereby there was an enactment over the qualifications of the aspirants, which is going to be applied in 2022 general elections. Now, in our country, we only have 1% of the total population, 1%. who have managed to acquire at least a degree. Now, 1%. Now, to me, if you say you have to have a degree for you to be a member of parliament, then you must be pursuing leadership. But you find someone who's pursuing artificial insemination. Yes, in parliament we have various committees you can serve in there. But to me, it's not logical if you are to have a degree and then come in the society and then just going on venturing in your political ambition with the people on the ground who don't have degrees. In fact, if you have a degree and you need to be elected, then the citizens must be having PhDs to understand what you're going to do for them. So from where you sit, what are you doing currently to be able to at least make sure that young people are participating more in the next coming general election? And what are the loopholes, if at all, this enactment is going to be